This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 900 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Thanks for tuning in. This is always one of the most popular things that I do each year. People love them, some bold predictions. And I do too. I enjoy coming up with them. But for anyone who's new to all of this, or new to me, I do need to make a general statement here. These are not hot take bold predictions. They may not be bold enough for you. I'm not sitting here saying some rookie running back who was drafted on day 3 is going to finish in the top 5 of the position, or that some quarterback is going to throw 70 touchdowns. I try to be realistic with my bold predictions. I explain why they're bold, and some of them may not be bold enough for you. But I do explain why they're bold, and I give reasons as to why these predictions could come to fruition. Every player has some range of outcomes in fantasy. These predictions are essentially looking at the lower and the higher end of those outcomes. Now, I emailed out 15 bold predictions in the Late Round Fantasy Football newsletter, and that email will eventually be added to the newsletter archives on lateround.com. But today, I'm picking 10 of those to share on the podcast. Now, before digging in, here's your reminder to take advantage and get a free late round draft guide. All you have to do is head to underdogfantasy.com, sign up with promo code LATEROUND, make a deposit, and you'll be emailed the guide shortly after signing up. That guide includes tons of strategy-related research, as well as the typical players to target, players to avoid, late round dart throws, and my top 200 rankings and tiers. There's one more update to the guide, which happens on Friday. And when you sign up, you can also get a deposit offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. You can play best ball while also getting the late round draft guide. So take advantage. Underdogfantasy.com, promo code late round. Brian Thomas will finish as a top 24 wide receiver. This bold prediction is bold because Brian Thomas is being drafted as the wide receiver 49. That's according to Fantasy Pros consensus ADP. So if he's a wide receiver too, a top 24 wide receiver, that would be pretty crazy. That's a great value. That's why this is bold. Now, why this could happen is because my ZAP model, my prospect model, really liked Brian Thomas. He scored a 94.5. That gives him very good odds to succeed in fantasy football throughout the first 3 years of his career. Since 2014, there have been 23 rookie wide receivers drafted in the wide receiver 40 to wide receiver 60 range with a ZAP score above 90. On average, those players outperformed ADP expectation by 1.4 PPR points per game. Over 39% of them ended up as what I call a moderate breakout, a player who outperforms ADP expectation by 3 or more points per game. That's one of the best subsets that you're going to find at the wide receiver position. Rookie wide receivers in the wide receiver 40 to wide receiver 60 range. And that's exactly where Brian Thomas is. Thomas could play the Calvin Ridley role this year. That might not seem like anything special given how Ridley underperformed last season, but according to PFF and their expected fantasy points model, Ridley finished 14th in expected fantasy points per contest last season. So Brian Thomas could definitely get this done. Javonte Williams will outscore David Montgomery. This one's bold because Williams gets drafted around RB28, Montgomery around RB19. Now, the downside case for David Montgomery, which is the case that I need to make for this bold prediction to come true, the downside case, it's really straightforward. David Montgomery doesn't score as many touchdowns this year. Montgomery only had a 5.1% target share per game rate last season. With Jahmyr Gibbs in the lineup, we shouldn't expect that number to be much higher. So he'll probably be a relatively touchdown-reliant player. As we know, Montgomery did get 13 touchdowns last season. But down the stretch, his usage close to the end zone changed. After he came back from an injury in Week 10, he ended up splitting goal line carries with Jahmyr Gibbs through the playoffs. He had 11, Jahmyr Gibbs had 10. So without that receiving ceiling, if they do continue to split the goal line rushes, that could be bad news for David Montgomery. He could hit the lower end of his range of outcomes. Now, on the other side is Javonte Williams. He's 2 years now removed from that knee injury. He wasn't overly effective last season, But of all the running backs in Denver, even though I love me some Jaleel McLaughlin, of all the running backs in Denver, he has the most upside. There's no doubt about it. He's the one who profiles most as a true bell cow. And the system itself is awesome for running backs. I've been saying this all offseason. Sean Payton-led teams own 8 of the top 17 team running back target share seasons since 2011. According to PFF's numbers, Williams actually finishes the RB17 in expected points per contest last year. Without the injury, he might end up seeing more work, and that could make him a surprise winner in 2024. Kyler Murray will finish as a top 3 quarterback. Now this one's bold because Murray is not being drafted really that close to being a top 3 quarterback. But here's why this could happen. Since 2011, there have been 35 quarterbacks who hit 300 or more pass attempts while hitting 5 or more fantasy points per game via rushing. Of those 35, 20 of them ended up scoring 20 or more standard fantasy points per game. Last year, 20 fantasy points per game at quarterback would have ranked right there in QB3 territory. Kyler Murray has hit 4.9 points per game with his legs in all 5 of his seasons in the league. In 4 of those 5, he was over that 5 mark. Add in Marvin Harrison Jr., a healthy knee, another year in this offensive system. You've got a high ceiling outcome for Kyler Murray. And it's not like he hasn't been close before. Murray's given us 2 top 5 finishes over his career in points per game. Honestly, of all the predictions on the list today, this one's probably the least bold. The Tennessee Titans will have the surprise offense of the season. The reason this one's bold is because you look at the fantasy football landscape, Tennessee Titans players, they're not being drafted all that high. Not only that, but like I said in the newsletter, they're led by a quarterback who eats banana peels. Here's why it can happen though. Mike Vrabel's gone. Brian Callahan, he's now their head coach. Given his history, we're probably going to see a lot more pass attempts in this Titans offense year over year. Cincinnati was pass heavy when Callahan was there, even when they didn't have Joe Burrow. Now, we don't know if Will Levis is the true answer at quarterback, but what we do know, he likes to push the ball down the field. Among qualified starters last season, Levis ranked by far as the top quarterback in 20-plus air yard throw rate. So you combine Will Levis's big arm and Brian Callahan's tendency to throw the ball a lot, and you got fantasy football goodness. This is a match made in fantasy football heaven. Potentially. Everything that Tennessee has done this offseason has pointed to them throwing the ball more. They didn't keep Derrick Henry, they add Callahan, they get Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd, and they get Tony Pollard, who's not this bruising early down running back to pair with Tajay Spears. He's more of a duplicate to Tajay Spears. So I really like this Tennessee offense this year to exceed expectation. Jordan Love will be a top 3 quarterback during the first half of the season. Now, I know this is oddly specific, but this one's bold because Jordan Love is usually drafted in that QB9 range. But this could happen strictly because of what I talked about last month on the podcast. Green Bay's opening schedule is awesome. The Packers open up the season against the Eagles. Then they get the Colts, Titans, Vikings, Rams, Cardinals, Texans, and Jags. Those 8 teams, according to PFF's secondary rankings, they come in at 24th, 28th, 15th, 27th, 26th, 32nd, 18th, and 29th. You're not going to find a better opening schedule than what Jordan Love has at the quarterback position. Tajay Spears will score 30 more points than Zamir White. This one's bold because Zamir White's the RB24 by ADP, Spears is the RB31. And then I'm just adding the 30 points in there to make this prediction even more lopsided. But I've said it throughout the summer. Is there a more traditional dead zone running back this year than Zamir White? He really hasn't done that much throughout his time in the NFL, aside from what he did at the tail end of the 2023 season, where he scored at least 12.6 PPR points in each of his final 4 games. Here's the problem. Dating back to college, Zamir White has never been a high-volume pass catcher. And even during that big December that he had last year, he was still averaging a sub 10% target share per game rate. The Raiders project to be a run-heavy team who won't run a lot of plays. Now, when I say run-heavy, you might be excited about that because Zamir White's an early down back. But there's also a chance that they're very inefficient and they're not scoring that many points. They're not giving Zamir White a lot of scoring opportunities. That's a problem. As is the fact that they have Alexander Mattison, who's kind of a replacement level player, but he could dig into this workload. And then they drafted Dylan Laube, who's a great pass catching back. So I think that Zamir White's one of those players who can meet expectation, but I just don't see where the ceiling is going to come from. Now, Tajay Spears, on the other hand, he's someone who does have a pretty high ceiling. His 14.8% target share per game rate last year, that was the 6th highest mark from any rookie running back since 2011. The running backs ahead of him, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, and Tariq Cohen. Spears is sharing a backfield. I like drafting both Spears and Pollard, not on the same team, but I've gotten a lot of both of them. Again, I really like the Tennessee Titans offense. But Spears is in a split backfield. He's going to have a worse projection versus Zamir White. But there's always a chance that he just sees more work than what's being expected. And there's also a chance that Tony Pollard gets hurt. That's why Spears has a chance to outscore Zamir White. Sam Darnold will finish with more passing yards than Justin Herbert. This one's bold because Justin Herbert is a way better quarterback than Sam Darnold. But here's why this can happen. It's because of offensive scheme. Kevin O'Connell's system in Minnesota has been one where the Vikings have been really pass heavy. They've ranked 6th in passing rate over expected during both of his seasons as head coach. Now that was mostly with Kirk Cousins, but with Kirk Cousins, the Vikings have ranked 3rd in the NFL in passing yards over the last 2 seasons. Now over in LA, things could look a lot different. You got Jim Harbaugh in town, and he hired offensive coordinator Greg Roman. Roman's been an NFL offensive coordinator for 9 seasons. 7 of those 9 seasons, his offense is ranked bottom 3 in pass rate. Now, I do think they're going to be more pass heavy than that this year, but there's a legitimate fear that the Chargers are slow, methodical, and run heavy. And you look at their pass catchers and you say, why wouldn't they be that way? So if the Chargers go run heavy and the Vikings don't drastically change things up, this prediction could happen. Jalen Waddle will outscore Marvin Harrison Jr. This one's bold because according to Fantasy Pros consensus ADP, Waddle is the wide receiver 21, Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver 9. Now look, when you listen to these bold predictions, it doesn't automatically mean that I'm in or out on a certain player. I'm looking at range of outcomes. With Marvin Harrison Jr., he's a rookie. We don't know exactly how things are going to go down with Harrison Jr. I think actually that where he's being drafted is totally fine. I've drafted him. But we have to recognize that things could go south, that he might not meet expectation. With Jalen Waddle, I just think that he's been massively undervalued all offseason. His points per game average did fall last year, but he's still ranked in the 94th percentile in yards per route run and the 92nd percentile in targets per route run. He's in one of the better offenses in football, and there's contingent upside with him too. If Tyreek Hill goes down, even just for a stretch of games, Jalen Waddle is going to be projected to see a 29% target share in that offense. He all of a sudden becomes a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. So don't take this as avoid Marvin Harrison. Take this as draft Jalen Waddle. Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels will both score 19 or more points per game. This one's bold because since 2011, among all rookie quarterbacks who played 8 or more games, only Cam Newton, Robert Griffin III, and Justin Herbert were able to score 19 or more points per game. Here's why this can happen though. Caleb Williams enters the league as a really good prospect, and he's a really good prospect who scored 27 rushing touchdowns throughout 3 years in college, and he has some of the best weapons that you're going to find for a rookie quarterback. That's why Williams can get to this mark, plain and simple. With Jaden Daniels, he doesn't have the same kind of weapons, but his rushing ability can definitely get him to 19 points. There have only been 5 rookie quarterbacks since 2011 to hit 300 pass attempts and 80 rush attempts. Those are numbers that we're expecting Jaden Daniels to get to. Those 5 were Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, and then 2 of the players that I mentioned earlier, Robert Griffin III and Cam Newton. So 2 of those 5 guys hit that 19 mark. The other 3 were at nearly 18 points per game. So if Daniels shows up as a passer, he can definitely get there. And now here's the last one. Jackson Smith-Njigba will finish as a top 20 wide receiver. This one's bold because according to consensus ADP, JSN is in that wide receiver 40 to wide receiver 50 range. But here's why it can happen. The Seahawks have a new offensive coordinator in Ryan Grubb. He's no stranger to running an offense with stud wide receivers. He's coming from Washington, where he just coached Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. The Huskies were a more pass-heavy team than what the Seahawks are going to be. But we can expect some of these concepts to transfer over, like a more up-tempo offense and an offense that's willing to throw the ball down the field. Seattle ranked dead last in plays run last year. The defense played a role in that, but so did offensive philosophy. And that offensive approach last year, it helped lead JSN to some pretty disappointing rookie season numbers. He had a 1.32 yards per route run rate, and his average depth of target was only 6.4 yards. With Tyler Lockett taking a step back last year in efficiency, it's not that hard to see JSN improving on those numbers. A rational offensive coordinator is not going to use JSN in that way. Really, at the end of the day, with this bold prediction, you're betting on the talent of Jackson Smith-Njigba. He entered the league with a really good ZAP score. He was a really good prospect. And we saw glimpses last year of strong wide receiver play. If he can take that natural step forward under this new offensive coordinator, this new scheme, a scheme that's going to push the ball deeper and not give him a 6-yard ADOT, big things can happen for JSN. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. And make sure you subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football YouTube channel. It's at youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. And one more thing. Starting this week, Late Round Perspectives is running every single week through the fantasy season, as is the mailbag episodes. So the mailbag and Late Round Perspectives drops on Friday. And then next week is game time. Next week is when the show goes to 5 episodes per week, because next week is week 1. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the final episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro.